Proverbs chapter 13, verse 23 says, "Abundant food is the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice." And so when we look at this, the fallow ground, it is abundant food for the poor, but injustice sweeps it away. So in other words, there's plenty enough food. There's plenty of food to go around. There's plenty of food for everybody to partake of. There's plenty of food even for the poor, but yet injustice comes into the picture, and as injustice comes into the picture, it sweeps away that abundant food to where the poor are going to suffer. Now, any society, every society, this takes place in where there's enough for everybody. There's enough for everybody to have their fill, but yet when injustice comes in, injustice sweeps the extra and the abundance away to where ultimately it's the poor that are going to suffer. The rich aren't going to suffer. It's the poor that are going to end up suffering. But I believe verse 25 better explains this verse, or more enhances this verse, and it tells us in verse 25 in Proverbs chapter 13, it says, "The righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the stomach of the wicked is in need." So what we see is we're looking at this spiritually. The righteous, they have an abundance to fulfill their appetite. They're the rich, they're the wealthy, those who are righteous. We're talking about spiritually here. And so as they have the abundance of righteousness, because remember, this week we've been talking about if you're sowing righteousness, you're going to reap righteousness. So they have an abundance for their soul, an abundance of righteousness for their soul. They're prospering in it because they're reaping it. And as they're reaping it, they're sowing it. And so as they're sowing it, they are prospering in it, and they're growing in it, and they're growing in their walk with God. Now, on the flip side of that coin, the stomach of the wicked is in need. Now, they represent the poor here. And again, we're talking about spiritually poor. And so as we're talking about spiritually poor here, they're not sowing any righteousness. In fact, they're not sowing anything that is good at all. Instead, what they're doing is they're sowing wickedness, they're sowing evil, they're sowing unrighteousness, and those are the things that they are also reaping. And so therefore their stomach is in need. They're lacking in the bread of righteousness. They're lacking in the water of life, which is Jesus himself. Jesus is also the bread. But what did Jesus say? Jesus said, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but every word proceeds from the mouth of God." And the wicked could care less about the word of God. The wicked could care less about the things of God. And as a result, they're starving. The starvation will lead to death. And those who are wicked, it's going to lead to eternal death. But those who are righteous realize that the only righteousness they have is through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And as they continue to sow that righteousness and they reap that righteousness and they prosper and grow in that righteousness, that is a continuation of their walk in Jesus Christ. And any abundance of righteousness they have is a continued act of grace of God. And so the wicked forsake it. Forsake the gift of God. Forsake the mercy of God. And end up dying of spiritual malnutrition and spiritual starvation. When all the while God is saying, "Here's my bread. Here's my son. Here's my water. Here's my son. Would you just partake of him? And you'll live. And you'll live in abundance." Turn to Jesus today. Trust in Jesus today. Believe on Jesus today.